Slot machines are one of the most addictive things in the world, and that's not by chance, it's by design. They are designed to keep people hooked for as long as possible. They are designed to addict. And they do this by purposefully mimicking a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. What is that, you ask? Something to train dogs. Yeah, interesting stuff. I'll explain that part later. But slot machines aren't the only thing designed to addict. In this video, I'll show you the exact strategies that social media, and YouTube in particular, use to get you addicted to them. The direct ways that YouTube is designed to accomplish this, and the very clever and insidious indirect way that they can actually influence the content of videos to keep you watching for longer. And at the end, I'll briefly describe some ways we can fight this. But before doing this, I'll briefly explain my own addiction to YouTube. In some ways, I've always tried to protect myself against the dangers of social media. I don't really use Facebook a lot, I don't have Twitter or Instagram account. I've always been weary of them and known for a long time that they can be addictive. But on the other hand, I've always liked learning new stuff and being entertained while doing so. And so YouTube seemed like the perfect fit for me. And it was, and it is. And one of the main reasons I started using YouTube a lot was because I didn't really see it as a social media. It was just a platform I used to watch videos. I honestly believe that regarding it as not really a social media was a big facilitator of my addiction. At that time, I already knew that social media could be addictive, but my defenses were down, and so I used it despite the negative consequences it had on my life. By the way, just a little context on addiction. The American Psychological Association uses the term substance use disorder instead of what we commonly refer to as addiction, and it is a complex condition in which there is uncontrolled use of a substance despite harmful consequences. People keep using that substance even when they know it is causing or will cause problems. The most severe substance use disorders are sometimes called addictions. Well, getting back to my story. As time progressed and went by, I realized that I started spending more and more time on it. Sometimes I would use it, and a lot of times I would use YouTube, and I still do, mainly when I'm anxious or I'm procrastinating doing a task that's making me anxious. I would do things like, okay, I'm gonna stop at 3 o'clock. And then the time came and I kept using, and then it became 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock and I couldn't stop. And that would just bring me more and more anxiety. So it just perfectly fits with the definition that I just told you. Keep using a substance despite harmful consequences. So yeah, YouTube addicts some people at least. So let's see the ways that it is designed to do so. There are a number of ways that YouTube is designed to keep us watching even when that's not exactly what we want, when that's not really what we want. I will tell you about 3 direct ways it does this. There are certainly others, but my goal is not to make an exhaustive list of all the addictive practices of YouTube, but to open your eyes to their questionable practices. By the way, do you remember when I said that slot machines used a variable ratio reinforcement schedule? Let me start by the basics. A reinforcement is something that is made with the goal of making a behavior more likely. In the case of slot machines, is to get you to play. In the case of YouTube and social media platforms, is to get you to keep using them, engaged. And the way that the delivery of those reinforcements is scheduled and planned is really important. There are some different types of reinforcement schedule though. There's a fixed interval one, which is like a paycheck, where after some specific and constant amount of time, you get a reward, just like a paycheck. In this case, the reward occurs at known and constant and predictable intervals, and that's really important, and that's why it's called fixed interval. A fixed ratio 1 instead of interval, so this one is called a fixed ratio and not a fixed interval one, because in this case your reward is dependent on a specific amount of behaviors. Imagine you're a baker and you bake 10 cakes, and for every 10 cakes you bake, you get $100. This is fixed because you know the exact amount you're gonna get if you make 10 cakes, but it is not an interval. It is not a specific amount of time because you can take longer to bake cakes or less time. What matters is how many you make. The difference is important because it's a fixed ratio one. What matters and what's being really reinforced is the behavior itself. So you need to work, you need to do stuff to get the reward, unlike the fixed interval one, which is not at all as effective. But this is not what social media platforms do. As I mentioned at the beginning, what they use is a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. And it is called variable because it is impossible to predict how many behaviors you need to do to get a reward. Imagine a slot machine. In a slot machine, you can't predict how many times you need to play to get a reward. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 100. And that uncertainty keeps you playing more and more and more. As I said, slot machines are designed to addict. And the thing is, they are not the only things that are designed to addict. Social media platforms like YouTube also use this variable ratio reinforcement schedule to do this. And they do this because this schedule is the most effective at getting you to continue making a behavior, as you can see in this image. But how is YouTube like this? Every time you refresh your front page, every time you click a new video, you don't know if something good is gonna come up. A lot of times it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. Sometimes you get disappointed, sometimes you get a reward and your behavior is reinforced. As I said in the beginning, this is the way that professional dog trainers train their dogs. And so this is very effective. Okay, next. Another way YouTube tries to addict is by having something called infinite scroll. This is such a staple of social media that we almost forget it is there. But have you wondered why social media platform screens never end? Why don't they end? Okay, there are some things to say about this. First, the experts. Companies have systematically removed stopping cues, those brief moments, like reaching the bottom of a screen, that suggest you might want to move on to something else. Ethical video game developers introduce those cues, which liberate players to play the game in chunks rather than in long binge sessions. The same works for tech products, where Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram make their feeds bottomless. Introducing natural endpoints would gently encourage users to move on to other activities. By the way, as I was doing the research for this video, and that's why the thumbnail has that written on it, is that very often YouTube doesn't get mentioned alongside other social media platforms. But if you're wondering why is this important and how important is YouTube in our lives, just take a look at this. YouTube is now the most used social media platform in the, maybe more worryingly, a baffling 94% of people between 18 and 24, that's my age category, uses YouTube. 94%. Finally, we are expected to spend almost 2 entire years of our existence on YouTube. Now that you are convinced about the importance of this, you might just be wondering who the evil genius behind the infinite scroll was. And here he is. In 2006, Mr. Raskin, a leading technology engineer himself, designed Infinite Scroll. He said the innovation kept users looking at their phones far longer than necessary, and that he hadn't set out to addict people and now felt guilty about it. He also said that it's as if they're taking behavioral cocaine and just sprinkling it all over your interface. And that's the thing that keeps you coming back and back and back. Behind every screen on your phone, there are literally 1,000 engineers that have worked on this thing to try to make it maximally addicting. I just want to reinforce the idea that things aren't the way they are by accident or by chance. They are as they are by design. So with that in your mind, let's talk about the less direct way that YouTube has to influence you. If you want to try to guess what it is, because it's relatively simple, you can just pause the video, go into the comments and write autoplay. Oops. Autoplay is probably one of the simplest things and direct ways to understand. And it is related to something that in behavioral psychology we know that it's really important: the power of defaults. As the behavioral insights team says, we have a strong tendency to stick with a default option, which is the outcome that occurs if we do not choose otherwise. Understanding the default and how it can be changed can significantly improve uptake of a service. And as we have seen, introducing markers or stops is a really effective way to get people to stop playing, to play in chunks instead of binge sessions like we mentioned before. And game developers do this, ethical game developers do this, so why shouldn't social media platforms do this also? Having a default option to keep watching, to autoplay the next video, makes the effort to stop bigger than the effort to keep watching. And that's exactly what the social media companies want you to do. That's exactly what YouTube wants you to do, to just keep watching even if it's not your decision. And to me, the worst thing about this is that these tactics are designed to create the illusion of choice. They are designed to make you believe that you want to keep going and going and going. But think about this. If they actually cared, if the designers cared, if social media platforms cared, they would actually give us the choice. They would introduce markers and stop, and they would ask us, do you want to continue? Are you sure you want to continue? They would even probably show us how much time we spent on YouTube that day or in that session, because don't be fooled, they have that data. But I will show you how to fight this at the end of the video. Right now, I will talk about the indirect way that YouTube has to get us addicted. So far, everything that I've mentioned is outside of the videos themselves. They are design choices in the layout of YouTube and the way it works. But YouTube actually has a very simple way to influence the content of videos themselves. And that may be actually the worst way they influence our addictions. As I'm trying to become a YouTuber and get a lot of views, I learned about this magical thing called the algorithm. As the goal of YouTube is to get you to stay engaged for as long as possible, the algorithm picks the videos that have more engagement and recommends them to people. So if there are two videos who are exactly the same, but one gets people to watch for 5 minutes and the other gets people to watch for 10, then the video that will be shown to more people and that will, as a consequence, be more watched, is the one that gets people engaged for 10 minutes. And this is actually the reason why there are thousands and thousands of articles telling you how to control the algorithm, how to make it its slave, how to be its master. But in reality, the articles are just ways to get more engagement in your videos, because that's what the algorithm selects for. And this is actually why YouTube videos might seem all the same sometimes, because there are literally formulas and a lot of tricks to get you to stay engaged for longer. And I will say this again, I know you've heard it a lot of times, but all of these things, all the things that YouTube and some YouTubers do are not by accident, they're by design. So what kind of things do YouTubers do to get your attention for longer? Introduce pattern interrupts. This is something I did before when I was talking and I introduced what the American Psychologists Association said a disorder was. You were seeing a talking head and then something else appeared. That's why I and a lot of others introduced B-roll in their videos and stuff like that. That is why we edit and cut our... That is why we edit and cut our mistakes, so that you don't need to endure pauses and breaks and get bored and disengage and bye-bye. And there's also a very basic formula to a YouTube video. You start with a hook, you tell people what you're gonna do and tell them about what's amazing about your video, and you end with a call to action. In this case, a call to action is basically telling you to subscribe or watch another video. Everyone does this. I'm sure there are a lot more things. This is not trying to be comprehensive, but you get the idea of it. YouTube can control, to some extent, what goes into the videos themselves. But what really tickles my brain and confuses me and makes me mad is that although people think that they are controlling the algorithm and saying, okay, I'm the YouTuber, I'm using the algorithm to get more views, what I believe is another way to look at it, not necessarily mutually exclusive, is that actually the algorithm is being used by YouTube to control you, to get you to do what they want, which is to find ways, not necessarily making your content better, but finding ways to be more engaging than you would normally be. So in my opinion, the YouTubers are actually not the masters, but in some way the slaves of this algorithm that dictates how they engage with their audience, how they try to engage with their audience. And this is probably the most insidious way that YouTube gets us addicted. It is not by changing their layouts and designs, it's by influencing the videos themselves, is by making a formula of engagement to try to grab the most important thing in social media, your attention, our attention, your attention. And never forget that your attention is the most valuable thing to these companies. And maybe, just maybe, you should preserve it and allocate it and treat it with as much care and importance as social media companies do. And that's what I'm gonna try to approach right now. What can we do? So, it is absolutely impossible to do a comprehensive list of all the things to do to fight this and to make it better. So I will redirect you to a website for the Center for Humane Technology. This is a group of people, of tech investors and former techies that, being disillusioned by the state of the art, how things are and were, they decided to create this center to try to make our relationship to applications and social media a little bit better. Honestly, if this is a topic that touches you dearly, or you think you are addicted, or know someone who is, I really recommend you going to this website that has a list of things that you can do to protect yourself and to take back control of your attention. Among them are setting boundaries, which mean deciding on times where your devices are inaccessible, or just disconnecting for a day, a week. But honestly, as I mentioned at the beginning, I have this addiction, and I know it's really hard, maybe sometimes it's really hard to just disconnect and to stop, and maybe sometimes, and a lot of times, YouTube is used as a painkiller and other social media are used as a painkiller to alleviate your sadness or your anxiety. And if you actually feel very anxious and you think that using YouTube and other social media is a way to deal with that, maybe you should get some professional help. I know this is a sensitive topic, but just keep that in your mind, okay? And please disable autoplay. Just disable autoplay. But the thing is that even if you take measures to protect yourself against the insidious ways that YouTube uses to get your attention and to addict you, the thing is that as long as YouTube keeps doing its thing, there will be vulnerable people that fall for it. There will be people that won't see this video, there will be people that are not literate in addiction and social media, and that will fall prey to their tactics. And so what I ask you is, if you really care about this, I can tell you two ways to try to engage and to help in a more macro level. First if you watch YouTube regularly, I'm sure you have favorite influencers that have a lot of influence. So you could ask them and talk to them about this, and maybe ask them to take some measures. One measure that could be taken is, in some videos, introduce an end screen where you ask people to stop. And the other way you could try to be an activist about this is just go to the website I just mentioned, the Center for Humane Technology, become a member and do some old-fashioned activism, talk about this, and a lot of stuff like that. This is a very complex topic, and honestly, I feel I haven't even scratched the surface. If there are things that I want you to take from this, is that social media platforms include YouTube. YouTube is a social media platform, and the choices they make are by choice and not by chance. They are designed to addict on purpose. And because they do this, we need to protect ourselves. We need to protect what they value most. We need to protect our attention. We need to value our attention and our engagement as they do. We need to take control of it, and we need to fight back. I hope I helped, and now I will show you that amazing end screen that I'll try to use to get people to stop. Hey, how long have you been watching YouTube now? 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? Maybe not, maybe you just arrived. I just want you to think for a bit. Am I enjoying this? Why am I doing this? Is it because I'm anxious? Am I running from my tasks? Or just because I like watching a hot dude talking? If the answer to this question is the first one, then you should just
stop it. Get some help.
Maybe not really get some help, but take a break. Call your mom, she's probably worried about you. Take care and see you next time. And please disable autoplay. Just please.